She was invisible, living on a grate, her entire world in a single backpack. Until the day she spotted a flaw in a $200,000 masterpiece on a stranger's wrist, and with a tool smaller than a toothpick, performed a repair that would unravel both their lives. Her name was Emily Carter. 3 years ago, she was a rising star in one of the world's most exclusive trades, a precision artist trusted with timepieces worth more than houses. Today, she is a statistic, one of the 500,000 Americans experiencing homelessness, her genius rendered invisible by circumstance. This is the story of the 2 seconds that changed everything, when a dying craft and a desperate life intersected on a rainy street corner, and the question was asked, what is a skill worth when the person who holds it is worth nothing? The precision began at the School of Horology in Lititz, Pennsylvania, one of only a handful of institutions in the country where you can learn to reassemble a universe smaller than a dime. Emily Carter graduated top of her class of 12. Her hands, steady and patient, could manipulate components under a microscope that most people need tweezers just to see. She landed a coveted apprenticeship with Henrik Jorgensen, a fourth-generation watchmaker in Manhattan, whose client list was a confidential ledger of billionaires and old-money families. For 3 years, Emily lived in the hushed, dust-free light of the workshop, learning that true luxury wasn't the gold on the case, but the 1,000 invisible perfections inside it. Her world was one of torque, tension, and amplitudes measured in degrees. A single speck of dust could halt a $50,000 movement. The pressure was immense, but so was the pride. She was preserving history, engineering art. Then her mother got sick. The diagnosis was swift and brutal. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. Emily, an only child, took a leave of absence to care for her in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. The medical bills ate through her savings in 6 months. She sold her own modest watchmaking tools, then her car. When her mother passed, the debt remained, a cold, 6-figure monument to loss. Her return to Jorgensen's workshop lasted 2 weeks. Grief had stolen the micro-tremor control in her fingers. A slight, imperceptible shake had crept in. In a trade measured in microns, it was a career-ending disability. She was let go with a generous severance and a letter of recommendation that felt like a tombstone. The fall was geometric. First the apartment, then the storage unit holding her last possessions. The couches of friends grew stiff with unspoken pity, then unavailable. The system designed to catch people like her, skilled, educated, suddenly broke, was a web of waiting lists, impossible paperwork, and the crushing arithmetic of minimum wage against urban rent. A single, catastrophic flu while she was temping as a data entry clerk cost her that job. With no address, no recent pay stubs, and the visible erosion of life on the streets, finding another became a fantasy. Her identity compacted into a single, weathered backpack, a sleeping bag, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and a small, red leather roll. Inside that roll, protected like a sacred relic, were her last 7 watchmaking tools, screwdrivers, a loop, a set of tweezers. They were her last tether to who she had been. This was her reality on that Tuesday morning in March. The rain was a cold, persistent drizzle that found every gap in her second-hand hoodie. She was posted under the granite overhang of the Morgan Tower, a 60-story bastion of finance, where the warmth from the revolving doors spilled out in brief, tantalizing waves. She watched the procession of tailored wool and polished shoes, a world she could once navigate as a service provider, now observed as a ghost. That's when she saw him. Alexander Thorne emerged from a black town car, his profile sharp, his attention on a tablet in his hand. He was the kind of man whose time was measured in billable minutes, his suit a dark, expensive armor. As he shook his wrist to glance at his watch, a reflex of the perpetually busy Emily saw it. The slight, telltale hitch in the sweep of the second's hand. A Patek Philippe grand complication, worth more than the median house price in most states, and it was running slow. It wasn't just slow. To anyone else it would be invisible, but Emily's eyes, trained for flaws in perfection, saw the subtle stagger. A likely culprit, a tiny particle of moisture or debris gumming the escapement, the very heart of the timekeeping mechanism. For a normal person, this meant a trip back to Geneva, a wait of 6 months, and a bill of $20,000. For Emily, it was a diagnosis made in 2 seconds, a reflex. The watchmaker in her awoke, shouting over the homeless woman's hunger. He was about to stride past her into the tower when she spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse but clear. "Excuse me, sir. Your Podek is losing about 4 seconds an hour." Alexander Thorne stopped as if he'd walked into glass. He turned, his expression one of pure, cold astonishment, not at being addressed but at the specific, impossible accuracy of the statement. He looked at the homeless woman, then at his wrist. "What did you say?" "I said it's running slow. The second's hand, it's not sweeping right. It's probably a moisture issue in the escapement. It'll get worse." A security guard started moving toward them. Thorne held up a single finger, stopping him dead. He studied Emily now, really looked at her. The dirt, the frayed gloves, the desperate clarity in her eyes. Then he did something extraordinary. He unclasped the watch and held it out toward her. "Prove it." The challenge hung in the damp air. The guard looked horrified. Emily didn't blink. She wiped her hands on her jeans, reached into her backpack, and pulled out the small red leather roll. She unrolled it on a dry patch of granite ledge, the precision tools gleaming dully. She selected a screwdriver, its tip finer than a needle. With a practiced motion, she used the loop, not even needing to put it to her eye, just holding it between her brow and the watch back as she inserted the tool into the nearly invisible seam. With a twist of flawless pressure, the case back released with a soft click. The exposed movement was a galaxy of golden wheels and rubies. Alexander Thorne watched, his earlier coldness replaced by pure, unadulterated fascination. Emily's world narrowed to the space under the loop. Her breath stilled. There it was, a speck of condensation, smaller than a grain of pollen, bridging 2 critical teeth in the escape wheel. Using tweezers with a tremor she forcibly suppressed, she gently nudged it free. She blew a minute breath across the mechanism. She closed the case back, sealed it, and wound the crown a few precise turns. She held it to her ear, listened for the healthy, rapid tick-tick-tick of the balance wheel oscillating at 28,800 beats per hour. She handed it back. "It should be within 2 seconds a day now, but it needs a full service. That was a temporary fix." Thorne took the watch, his fingers brushing hers. He fastened it, watched the second's hand sweep in a smooth, uninterrupted circle. He was silent for a long 10 seconds. He reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a burgundy leather wallet, and extracted 5 $100 bills. "For your expertise," he said, his voice different now, softer. Emily looked at the money. It represented warmth, food, a hostile bed for a week. She shook her head. "I didn't do it for money. I did it because it was wrong." She packed her tools away, shouldered her backpack, and walked away into the rain, leaving the most powerful man on that city block staring at the empty space where she had been. For 3 days, nothing. Emily assumed the bizarre encounter was a fleeting anomaly, a splash of color in her gray reality. She was wrong. On the 4th day, the black town car returned. It didn't just park, it glided to the curb where she was trying to fix a broken zipper on her backpack. The rear window slid down. Alexander Thorne was inside, but he wasn't alone. Seated beside him was an elderly man with a shock of white hair and eyes that missed nothing, peering at her through small, round spectacles. Thorne spoke. "Miss Carter, get in the car, please." It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in quiet urgency. "We need to talk about your future." Behind the town car, 2 more identical sedans had pulled up, doors opening, men in suits emerging, not guards but an entourage. They had been looking for her, and now they had found her. The car door closed with a sound like a vault ceiling, enveloping Emily in silence leather and the scent of lemon wood polish. The partition was up, separating them from the driver. Alexander Thorne gestured to the elderly man beside him. "Emily Carter, this is Klaus Richter." The name struck her like a physical blow. Klaus Richter. The Klaus Richter. A legend whose technical papers she had studied. A master watchmaker who had trained half the senior technicians at Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet. He was a ghost, retired for a decade. He peered at her over his spectacles, his voice a dry rustle. The repair on Alexander's watch, described the procedure, Precisely. It was a test. Her mind, fogged by hunger and shock, snapped into the sharp, clinical focus of the workshop. She described the likely point of contamination, the choice of screwdriver tip to avoid marring the case, the angle of extraction for the spec, the importance of not over-lubricating. She spoke for 2 minutes without pause. When she finished, Richter gave a single, slow nod. He turned to Thorne. She is correct, in every detail. More importantly, she diagnosed it in seconds in the rain with the watch on a moving wrist. That is not training. That is instinct. It is extinct. Thorne leaned forward. Miss Carter, Klaus has examined the watch. The fix is flawless. But that's not why we're here. We're here because what you represent is a statistical impossibility. A certified watchmaker of your caliber should be earning 6 figures at a boutique in Geneva or Dubai. You should not be sleeping on a grate. We verified your story. Your apprenticeship with Jorgensen, your mother's illness, your debt. We know about the tremor. Emily flinched. Thorne continued, his gaze unrelenting. Klaus believes the tremor is psychological, a somatic manifestation of grief and stress, not a neurological degradation. He thinks it can be overcome. I run Thorne Capital. We have a problem. A $7.3 million problem. He pulled a tablet from the seat back, waking the screen. It showed a sleek, modern lounge. This is the Vault, a private club I own on the 48th floor of this building. It has a concierge service for members, which includes securing reservations, private jet charters, and luxury goods maintenance. Last year, we expanded into watch care. We built a state-of-the-art mini-manufacturer, hired 2 certified watchmakers. Our waitlist filled instantly. We became a secret hub for the city's elite to service their complications without shipping them overseas. He swiped, and the image changed to a spreadsheet of angry red numbers. 6 months ago, our lead watchmaker had a heart attack. The second was poached by a Swiss brand for triple the salary. Our service collapsed. We have 147 watches in custody with an average value of $50,000 each. Members are furious. The reputational damage is immeasurable. We cannot find a replacement. There are literally none available. The industry is dying, Miss Carter. The masters are retiring. The new graduates are hired before they finish school. You are a ghost from a dying world who just fixed a $200,000 watch on a sidewalk. So here is my offer. The car had begun to move, gliding through the rain-slicked streets. You come to work for me at the Vault. You will be our head watchmaker. You will have a salary and apartment health benefits. Klaus will consult to help you retrain your hands. You will clear our backlog and restore our service. Emily stared, her mind rejecting the scale of it. It was a fairy tale, a trap. Why? She whispered. You could have just given me money. Why this? Thorne's expression was that of a chess player seeing 10 moves ahead. 3 reasons. First, because you refused the money. That told me you weren't an opportunist. You were a craftsman. I value integrity. Second, because solving this problem saves my investment and my reputation. It is a business decision. Third, he paused, and for the first time she saw something beyond calculation. Because waste offends me. Seeing a skill like yours discarded, while my members wait 8 months for a simple cleaning, is an absurd failure of the market. I am in the business of correcting market failures. The car stopped underground. They were in a private garage beneath the Morgan Tower. Elevators whooshed them up to the 48th floor. The Vault was all muted grays, deep carpets, and silence that cost more than noise. Thorne led her past a wine cellar displaying bottles older than she was, past a library of first editions, to a door marked simply Atelier. Inside was a watchmaker's paradise. 2 cleanroom workstations with anti-static mats, stereo microscopes, ultrasonic cleaners, a wall of specialized tools, and a humidity-controlled safe for watch storage. It was better equipped than Jorgensen's workshop. On one bench sat an open watch, its movement exposed. Richter gestured to it. A Vacherin Constantin Tourbillon. The balance wheel is unstable. Demonstrate your approach. Her hands trembled as she sat. She looked at her tools in the red roll, then at the pristine professional set before her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and thought of her mother's hands, steady even at the end. She picked up the tweezers. The tremor was there, a faint buzz of anxiety. She willed it down, focusing not on her hand but on the microscopic tip of the tool on the tiny screw it needed to grasp. The world narrowed. The screw was secured, placed in a tray. She performed a basic regulation check, her motion slow at first, then gaining fluidity as muscle memory overrode fear. After 20 minutes she looked up. Richter nodded, almost smiling. The tremor is fear, not failure. It will pass. For the next 72 hours, Emily existed in a surreal bubble. Thorne's people secured her a studio apartment in a building he owned, 2 blocks away. They gave her an advance on her salary. She bought clean clothes, ate her first full meal in months, and slept in a bed that felt like a cloud. The whiplash was dizzying. At the atelier, under Richter's watchful eye, she began with simple services, cleaning and regulating less complicated pieces. The tremor lessened each day, chased away by focus and the familiar, comforting ritual of the work. She was home, but the outside world had not disappeared. On the 4th day, she met the staff: Martin the sommelier, Sophia the concierge, and Charles the immaculately dressed manager of the vault, whose smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked at her cheap sneakers, her still too thin frame, and his courtesy was a thin veneer over cold disdain. "A remarkable story, Miss Carter. We do hope you can solve our little problem." The message was clear: you do not belong here. The members, when they came to drop off or collect their timepieces, were worse. They would look through her, speaking only to Charles, their relief at having a service restored warring with their discomfort at being served by someone who, just days ago, they would have stepped over. She was an exotic solution, not a person. Then she opened the safe. The backlog was a historian's dream and a watchmaker's nightmare. A 1928 Rolex Prince once owned by a jazz legend. A modern Richard Mille worth over $1 million, its case scarred from a tennis match. A Breguet with a perpetual calendar that hadn't been serviced in 50 years. And at the back, in a separate box, was the reason for the $7.3 million problem. A Patek Philippe Sky Moon Tourbillon, reference 6000. One of the most complicated wristwatches ever made, with a double-faced dial showing the moon phases, sidereal time, and a tourbillon. It belonged to Leo Vance, a notoriously volatile tech billionaire and Thorne's most important client. It had been dropped, and the tourbillon cage, the heart of its heart, was bent. The previous watchmaker had attempted a repair, made it worse, and then had his heart attack. The watch was now a silent, gorgeous corpse. The official Patek repair estimate was $200,000 and a potential wait of 2 years, with no guarantee they could save all original parts. Vance was threatening lawsuits. This watch was Emily's real test. She worked for 16 days, slowly rebuilding her confidence, clearing the simpler pieces. The club's atmosphere remained tense. Charles made pointed comments about rushing the process. Rumors swirled among the wealthy members. Was the homeless watchmaker a PR stunt? Could she really be trusted? Then Leo Vance arrived unannounced. He was a storm of impatience in a cashmere hoodie. He marched past Charles, straight into the atelier where Emily was calibrating a chronograph. You're the miracle worker," he barked. "I want to see my watch. I want to see what you've done." Emily, her heart hammering, retrieved the Sky Moon Tourbillon. It was still disassembled, its damaged cage under a microscope. Vance peered at it, his face darkening. "It looks worse. It's in pieces." "It has to be fixed," Emily said, her voice quiet but steady. "The cage is deformed by 3 microns. It has to be carefully reshaped or it will never keep time. The previous repair attempt used too much force. I'm making new custom tools to apply pressure in stages." Vance stared at her, then at the microscopic disaster. "If you ruin this," he said, his voice low, "you won't be going back to the street. You'll wish you could." He left, leaving a chill in the warm room. That night, as she walked the 2 blocks to her apartment, she noticed a man in a dark coat lingering near her building's entrance. He didn't approach her, but his gaze followed her inside. Paranoia, she told herself, the stress. But the next morning, a folded newspaper was outside her door. Not delivered to the building, placed there. It was a financial tabloid open to the gossip page. A headline screamed, "Thorne's charity case. Can a homeless woman really fix your $1 million watch?" There was a grainy, long-lens photo of her leaving the Morgan Tower, her backpack over her shoulder. The article dripped with cynicism, questioning Thorne's judgment, hinting at liability and protecting the assets of the elite. It quoted an industry source saying, "No reputable atelier would ever hire someone without a stable professional history. The risks are too great." The source was anonymous, but the phrasing felt like Charles. The walls of her new world were not just cold, they were actively hostile. She brought the paper to Thorne. He read it in his office, his face granite. "This is from a rival. Someone wants to scare off my clients by undermining you. They're afraid you'll succeed." He crumpled the paper. "Ignore it. Focus on the Vance watch. Your success will silence them." But the damage was done. That afternoon, 3 members called to pause their service requests. "Until the situation is clearer," they said. The trust was fragile and it was cracking. Emily buried herself in the Sky Moon tourbillon. The repair was a high-wire act over an abyss. The titanium cage was fiendishly delicate. She had to machine a tiny, concave anvil to support it perfectly, then use a hair-thin lever to apply minuscule, measured pressure, annealing the metal with a pinpoint heat source to prevent cracking. Klaus Richter consulted daily, guiding her through the uncharted territory. For 2 weeks she lived in the atelier, sleeping on a cot Thorne had brought in, her entire universe the circle of light under her microscope. The tremor was gone, burned away by absolute concentration. Finally, the day came. The cage was true. She reassembled the tourbillon, her hands moving with a serene certainty she hadn't felt since before her mother's illness. She wound the watch. The tourbillon cage began its mesmerizing 60-second rotation, the balance wheel inside it beating perfectly. It was alive. She called Thorne and Vance. They gathered in the atelier. Vance watched silent as Emily placed the watch in the timing machine. The lines on the screen showed near-perfect amplitude and rate. It was functionally perfect. Vance put it on his wrist, watching the tourbillon spin. He looked at Emily, then at Thorne. "How much do I owe you?" Thorne named a figure, a fraction of the Podek estimate. Vance wrote a check on the spot. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. The article in the paper was trash. He said it to the room, then left. It should have been victory. It felt like it for a day. Congratulations from the staff were muted but real. Even Charles offered a stiff nod. Thorne presented her with a bonus check. But as she left work that evening, the man in the dark coat was there again. This time he was closer, and this time he spoke. "Emily Carter." His voice was flat. "We need to talk about Henrik Jorgensen." The name of her former master, the man who had let her go, sent a new kind of cold through her veins. The man didn't wait for a response. He slipped a plain white card into her hand. On it was a phone number and a single embossed symbol, a stylized lion's head. "Call, before your new friend Thorne finds out what really happened in that workshop." He melted into the evening crowd, leaving Emily standing on the sidewalk, the weight of her past crashing back down, holding a card that promised the fairy tale was about to turn into a different kind of nightmare. The card felt like a shard of ice in her hand. The embossed lion's head was familiar, a logo she'd seen in trade journals but couldn't immediately place. Jorgensen. What could they possibly know? That night in her apartment, she stared at the number. Calling felt like stepping off a cliff. Not calling felt worse. She used a burner phone she'd bought with cash, dialing from a park bench 2 miles from her building. A woman answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and efficient. "Verification code, please." Emily was stunned. I was given this number." A man mentioned Henrik Jorgensen. There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Ah, Miss Carter, we've been hopping you call. Listen carefully. Your former master, Henrik Jorgensen, didn't let you go because of a tremor. He was paid to let you go. He was paid to end your career." The world tilted. Paid by who? Why? The who is a consortium of luxury watch brands and high-end retailers. The why is control. You represent a threat to a very lucrative, very fragile ecosystem. The woman explained with chilling clarity. The luxury watch service industry, worth billions, operates on scarcity. The brands maintain their prestige and pricing power by controlling who can service their products, creating artificial shortages of parts and training. Independent masters like Jorgensen are tolerated only if they play by strict, unwritten rules. One rule: you do not train true peers. You train competent technicians, not visionary restorers who could one day challenge the system. Emily, with her preternatural instinct, was becoming a peer. She was asking questions about metallurgy and antique restoration techniques that pointed toward true mastery, the kind that could eventually start her own rival atelier. She was a rising star who asked too many of the right questions, the woman said. The consortium applied pressure. They threatened to cut off Jorgensen's supply of genuine parts, which would have killed his business. They offered a substantial payment for your removal. The story about the tremor was a convenient fiction he agreed to propagate. Your mother's illness and debt were simply unfortunate timing they exploited. Emily's breath came in short gasps. The bedrock truth of her last 3 years, that she had failed, that her hands had betrayed her, was a lie. She was pushed. Why tell me this now? Because Alexander Thorne's vault experiment is a direct threat to their model. He's building an independent, elite service center outside their control. If you succeed there, you legitimize it. You prove that world-class service can exist outside Geneva. You make them obsolete. They will destroy Thorne's venture, and you, to prevent that. The negative press was their opening move. I represent a group of investors and collectors who find this monopolistic practice distasteful and bad for business. We want Thorne's model to succeed. We want you to succeed. But to do that, you need to understand what you're really up against. The call ended with a warning. They are already inside the vault. Be careful who you trust. Emily sat on the bench until the streetlights flickered on. The pieces clicked into a horrifying mosaic. Charles's disdain, the impossible scarcity of watchmakers. The industry's desperate, aging workforce wasn't just an accident, it was a product. A controlled burn to keep prices high and power centralized. And she, a homeless apprentice, had accidentally become the spark for a revolution. She didn't tell Thorne, not yet. The voice's warning about trust echoed. Instead, she began to watch. She noticed Charles spending an unusual amount of time on the phone in his glass office, his back turned. She saw a junior concierge, a man named David, taking unusually detailed notes when members discussed their watches. She started keeping a private log of her work, photographing each watch and its components before and after service, creating an unassailable record of her process. A week later, the sabotage began. It was subtle at first. A set of her calibrated screwdrivers was found mysteriously misaligned. Then, the climate control log for the watch safe showed a brief, unexplained humidity spike one night. No damage was done, but it was a fingerprint. A warning. Thorne's security team found nothing. Charles suggested it was carelessness on Emily's part. The atmosphere in the atelier became a quiet war. The breaking point came with the Denton watch. Sir James Denton was old English aristocracy, a collector of historically significant military timepieces. He brought in a 1944 Buer Navigator's watch, a massive pilot's piece with a rare black dial variant. It wasn't just valuable, it was a piece of history, worn on bombing raids over Europe. It needed a full restoration. Emily worked on it for 10 days, painstakingly cleaning the movement, sourcing a period-correct crystal, preserving every scratch on the case as part of its story. The night before Denton was to collect it, she finished. She placed it in the safe, triple-checked the lock, and went home. The next morning, the watch was on her bench. The crystal was shattered. The minute hand was bent, and etched crudely into the black dial as if with a sharp pin was a single word: stop. Emily's blood turned to ice. This was no longer intimidation, it was desecration, and it was a frame. She had been the last one in the room, her tools were there. Charles would argue she cracked under pressure. She took a series of high-resolution macro photographs. The scratches on the dial were wrong. The tool used was thicker and cruder than any she owned. The angle of force was left-handed. She was right-handed. This was evidence, not of her guilt, but of the saboteur. She finally went to Thorne. She laid out everything: the card, the phone call, the consortium, the escalating sabotage, and now the vandalized Denton watch. She showed him the photos. Thorne listened, his expression growing colder and harder with each revelation. When she finished, he was silent for a full minute. "You should have come to me immediately," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This isn't just an attack on you, it's corporate warfare on my property. They've declared war." He stood up. "We're not playing defense anymore." Thorne's countermove was swift and brutal. He didn't fire Charles, he promoted him. He gave him a new, very public title, Director of Member Relations, and moved his office to the opposite side of the club, far from the atelier. It was a masterstroke. It removed Charles from the scene of the crime without tipping their hand, while putting him under the scrutiny of a new assistant Thorne assigned to him. Simultaneously, Thorne called Sir James Denton personally. He didn't make excuses. He told him the truth. A rival was trying to destroy the vault's service, and his watch had been vandalized as part of that campaign. He offered a full, no-questions refund, a loaner watch of equal value, and a pledge that Emily would not only restore the Buer to perfect condition, but that he would personally cover the cost of having the original dial restored by the world's top enamel artist in Switzerland. Denton, intrigued by the drama and impressed by Thorne's blunt honesty, agreed. More than that, he became an ally. But the consortium wasn't finished. Their next move was public and devastating. A lawsuit was filed, not by a brand but by a member of the vault, a reclusive hedge fund manager named Arthur Lang. The suit claimed gross negligence and breach of contract. Lang alleged that a rare FP Journe tourbillon Emily had serviced had been returned with irreparable damage to its chronometric integrity, costing him over $300,000 in lost value. The court documents were leaked to the same tabloid that had run the first story. This time, the headline was a sledgehammer. Thorne's homeless horologist accused of wrecking $300 K watch. It was a perfect attack. It used the legal system to create a cloud of official doubt. It came from a member, not a competitor, giving it credibility. And it targeted the one thing Emily was rebuilding, her professional reputation. The vault's phone began ringing with cancellations. Thorne's lawyers were grim. The damage was real, and the process would be slow. In the court of public opinion, they were already losing. Emily was desperate to see the watch. Lang's lawyers refused, citing the ongoing investigation. She knew it was a fake claim, but proving it was impossible without examining the timepiece. She spent a sleepless night scouring her own records. She found her photos of the FP Journe's movement before service. She had documented a tiny, pre-existing hairline crack on the edge of the main plate, a flaw she had noted in her report to Lang, but had determined did not affect performance. The consortium's saboteur must have worsened that crack. It was her word against theirs. Just as despair began to set in, Klaus Richter arrived at the atelier unannounced. He had seen the news. He examined Emily's photos, his old eyes missing nothing. "The crack," he muttered. "It is worse in the lawyer's photograph. See here." He pointed to a microscopic change in the fracture pattern. "This is impact damage, not stress from wear. Someone struck it." It was a clue, but not proof. Then Richter offered something else, a name. "There is a man, a forger once. He specialized in faking damage for insurance claims in the jewelry world. He retired, but his work had a signature. He would use a specific frequency of ultrasonic cleaner to fatigue metal in a way that mimicked accidental damage. If this was done to the main plate, I could identify the tool." Finding this man was a needle in a global haystack, but Thorne had resources. Within 48 hours, his investigators found him. Gerald Foss, living under a different name in Maine. Thorne and Emily flew there in a private jet. Foss, a frail man in his 70s, was terrified when they appeared at his door. Thorne didn't threaten, he made an offer. "Identify the tool used to damage this watch," he said, showing the photos. "Tell us who commissioned you, and you will receive a sum that ensures your comfortable retirement, far from any legal repercussions. Refuse, and I will give all my evidence of your past activities to the authorities." Foss broke in 10 minutes. He identified the damage as the work of a specific, custom-made resonant driver he had designed. Only two existed. He had sold one years ago to an intermediary representing a European luxury group. He gave them a bank account number for the payment. Thorne's forensic accountants traced the payment. It led to a shell company in Liechtenstein, which ultimately traced back to a corporate holding vehicle whose major shareholder was none other than the Lionel Group. The lion's head, the same symbol on the card. The consortium had a name, and they had just left a fingerprint. Armed with this, Thorne's lawyers prepared a devastating counterclaim, accusing the Lionel Group of tortious interference, industrial sabotage, and defamation. They scheduled a press conference for the following Monday to present the evidence. The war was about to go nuclear. The night before the press conference, Emily worked late, finishing the restoration of Sir Denton's bureau. As she placed the perfectly restored watch in the safe, the door to the atelier opened. It was David, the junior concierge. He looked pale, nervous. "Miss Carter, I need to talk to you. It's about Mr. Charles, and the night the Denton watch was damaged." He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "I saw something, but they said they'd ruin my family." Before Emily could respond, the lights in the atelier went out, plunging the room into the deep blue gloom of the city's night glow. The door to the main club clicked, the sound of a lock engaging. From the shadows near the parts cabinet, a voice spoke, calm, familiar, and chillingly polite. It was Charles. "David, you really should have learned to keep your mouth shut. And Miss Carter, you should have stayed on the street. It was safer there." In his hand, glinting in the faint light, was not a gun, but a small, brutal-looking hammer, the kind used to shatter watch crystals without leaving ballistic evidence. The final confrontation had not been scheduled in a boardroom or a courtroom. It had arrived quietly in the dark room where it all began. In the cobalt gloom, Charles's polite veneer had evaporated, revealing the cold operator beneath. The hammer in his hand was a brutish contrast to the delicate world surrounding him. David whimpered, backing into a workbench. Emily's mind, trained for crises under a microscope, didn't panic. It assessed. The hammer was for show, for terror. If Charles wanted them dead, he wouldn't be talking. He needed a specific outcome, their silence, or better, a confession of guilt coursed in the dark. He was still managing the narrative. "The Lionel Group pays well, Charles," Emily said, her voice steady. She took a small step to her right, putting a heavy ultrasonic cleaner between them. "But not enough for prison. Thorne has the evidence. The forger Foss talked. The shell company in Liechtenstein, it's over." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Charles's face. He hadn't expected her to know the name. He recovered quickly. "Then I have nothing to lose by making sure you can't testify, do I?" He took a step forward. "You do," Emily said, her hand slipping into the pocket of her work apron. "Because I'm not the only one who knows, and the evidence isn't here. It's with Thorne's lawyers, set to release automatically if I don't check in every hour." It was a bluff, but a plausible one. Charles hesitated. That second of doubt was all she needed. Her fingers closed around the object in her pocket, a high-intensity UV flashlight used to inspect luminous watch dials. She whipped it out, thumbed it on, and aimed it directly at his eyes. The sudden, searing blue-white beam in the dark room was blinding. Charles cried out, throwing his arm up. Emily didn't attack. She yelled, "David," the panic button. Under every workbench was a silent alarm. David jolted into action, dove and slapped it. The response was instantaneous. The door burst open not a second later, not from the club side, but from a service entrance Emily hadn't even known existed. Two of Thorne's security men flooded in, followed by Thorne himself. The lights flashed on. Charles, still disoriented, dropped the hammer. It was over in seconds. As Charles was pinned, Thorne looked at Emily, then at the hammer on the floor. "You were supposed to wait for us," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and relief. He had been monitoring the situation. David's nervous approach had been the trigger. "He was going to break my hands," Emily said simply. It was the truth. In that moment, she had known it. The hammer wasn't for killing. It was for destroying the instruments of her skill, the ultimate message from the consortium. The press conference the next morning was no longer a defensive play. It was a victory lap and a declaration of war. Thorne, flanked by his lawyers and a pale but determined David, laid out the entire scheme. He presented the forensic evidence from Gerald Foss, the financial trails, and a signed statement from David detailing Charles's instructions and threats. He announced countersuits for hundreds of millions in damages. The story exploded, but this time, the narrative flipped completely. It was no longer about a homeless woman's incompetence. It was a David and Goliath story of corporate corruption trying to crush a skilled artisan and an innovative business. The Lionel Group's stock price plummeted by noon. Arthur Lang, the hedge fund manager, dropped his lawsuit before the day was out. His lawyers issued a terse statement about a misunderstanding. The FP Journ watch was quietly returned to the vault. Emily's photographic evidence of the pre-existing crack, now part of the public record, made Lang look like either a pawn or a fool. The dent in the vault's reputation was not just repaired, it was fortified into legend. Membership applications tripled. They weren't just joining a club, they were joining a cause. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes fell. Regulatory agencies in Europe and the US opened investigations into the Lionel Group's anti-competitive practices. Several major brands, sensing the shifting winds, publicly distanced themselves from the consortium and reached out to the vault to discuss potential service partnerships. The artificial scarcity of watchmaking began to crack under the spotlight of scandal. For Emily, the resolution was personal. With part of her bonus and with Thorne's legal team assisting, she formally challenged the revocation of her watchmaker's certification, presenting the evidence of consortium interference. The review board, under new scrutiny, reinstated her credentials unanimously. She was no longer an apprentice or a charity case. She was Emily Carter, master watchmaker and head of restoration at the vault. She found a new apartment, not one owned by Thorne, but one she chose herself. It had a small balcony and good light. She framed her reinstated certification and hung it beside a photo of her mother. The tremor was gone, banished not just by practice, but by the vindication that the flaw had never been in her hands to begin with. One evening, Klaus Richter invited her to dinner at his cluttered brownstone. Over a meal, he pushed a small, worn notebook across the table. "My personal journals, observations on complications they don't teach anymore. You are ready for them." It was the ultimate gesture of acceptance. She was now a peer, an heir to a legacy that the consortium had tried to sever. The final surprise came 6 months later, on a bright autumn day. A package arrived at the vault, addressed to Emily. It bore Swiss postmarks and the insignia of the Watchmakers of Switzerland Training Committee. Inside was a formal letter and a prospectus. They were establishing a new, fully funded apprenticeship program in the United States, aimed at diversifying the field and addressing the critical skills gap. The program advisory board listed several renowned masters, including Klaus Richter. And the proposed director of the New York training atelier was listed as Emily Carter. The cover letter requested her participation. It was signed by several brand CEOs who had been part of the Lionel Group. It was a surrender and an offer of peace. They had tried to break her. Now, they needed her legitimacy to rebuild. Thorne advised caution. "They're co-opting you, making you part of the system." Emily considered it. She thought of the sidewalk, the grate, the feeling of being invisible. She thought of the thousands of skilled people discarded by systems that saw them as problems, not potential. She accepted the position on one non-negotiable condition: that the program include an outreach and scholarship initiative specifically for individuals facing homelessness or significant systemic barriers, with integrated housing and support services. They agreed. The Emily Carter Fellowship was born. The first student was a former aerospace engineer who had lost everything after a medical bankruptcy. He had the mind for it. He just needed the chance. The war was over. The vault's atelier was busier than ever, its reputation unassailable. Emily's life had found a rhythm of meaning, a blend of exquisite private work and a larger purpose. One afternoon, as she was teaching her first fellow how to polish a pinion to a mirror finish, her personal phone buzzed. It was a number from Seattle, her daughter. The text was brief. "Mom, I've been reading about you. I think I'd like to talk." Emily put down her tweezers. walked to the window overlooking the city and cried for the first time in years. They were not tears of grief, but of a restoration she had never dared to hope for. She had answered the question posed on that rainy street corner. A skill's worth is not set by the market that commodifies it, but by the person who wields it with integrity. And a person's worth, she had proven, is not defined by their circumstances, but by their courage to repair what is broken, no matter how small the tool or how large the forces arrayed against them. The invisible had become seen, not as a victim, but as a master. And in doing so, she had begun to recalibrate an entire industry, one precise, measured tick at a time. Emily Carter's story is a parabola of modern absurdity, a steep arc from discarded expertise to indispensable authority, drawn by the unbreakable thread of skill. It reveals a hidden fracture in our economy, a system that can simultaneously cry out for specialized talent and throw that same talent away based on circumstance rather than capability. The watch, that ultimate symbol of ordered time and status, became the proof of a chaotic truth. Value is not intrinsic. It is assigned, often wrongly. A consortium of billion-dollar brands saw her as a threat to be eliminated. A financier saw her as a problem to be solved. But in the end, it was the immutable precision in her hands that wrote the final verdict. Her journey forces an uncomfortable question. How many other masters are currently invisible? How many engineers, programmers, artists, and craftspeople are navigating shelter systems or drowning in debt, their genius rendered inert by a system that sees only their predicament and not their potential? The watchmaking crisis is a microcosm. An industry starves for lack of trained artisans while actively gatekeeping the very pathways to create them. Emily's victory was not just personal, it was a systemic correction. The fellowship that now bears her name isn't charity. It's a recognition that talent is a non-renewable resource, and we lose it at our collective peril. The broader implication is about visibility. We walk past people every day, making silent assessments based on appearance, on housing status, on momentary struggle. Emily's story is a mandate to look closer. The most critical component in any complex system is often the one we've learned to ignore. What changed her world was not a grand policy shift, but a single moment of being seen, truly seen for what she could do, rather than what she lacked. Alexander Thorne saw the skill, not the dirt. That gaze, rare and deliberate, became the lever that moved her world, and in turn began to move an industry. So what remains? The Vault's atelier thrives. The Emily Carter Fellowship selects its second class of students. The legal battles with the Lionel Group grind on, a permanent stain on their practices. But the lingering question is this. In a world increasingly automated and digitized, what is the true value of a human hand guided by a disciplined mind? Emily's answer, etched in repaired gears and restored legacies, is that this value is incalculable. It is the difference between a broken artifact and a living heirloom, between scarcity and abundance, between a closed door and an open workshop. Her story ends not with a full stop, but with the continuous, satisfying sweep of a second's hand, a system set back in motion, ticking forward, measured not just in time, but in restored potential. If you found this story of hidden genius and quiet revolution compelling, make sure to subscribe. We delve deep into the untold narratives that redefine what we think is possible. Thanks for watching.